Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Thanks for being here. We have to talk about the Georgia election reform law and the true story behind it. The media and the Democrats are blatantly lying to your face. So I want to be clear and concise about exactly what this law says. All you hear about is voter suppression, it's torture, we're locking out black people from the vote, Jim Crow 2.0, Jim Crow on steroids. Biden called the bill sick. What's really going on? I got 4 points.
It's sick. Deciding in some states that you cannot bring water to people standing in line, waiting to vote.
That's the first lie, that you're not allowed to drink water. Okay? You can't drink water when in line. You can't give people water. Total lie. The other day we talked about this. We showed the text of the bill. The bill says poll workers can give people water. Campaign workers can't. This is a law about electioneering, and it exists in every single state. Joe Biden's state of Delaware has the same law. Every state has it. It says you can't show up with Joe Biden water bottles. You can't show up with water bottles that have a MAGA sticker on it and pass them out to people in line. It's a basic electioneering law. Everyone can bring their own water. Everyone's allowed to drink water. And poll workers can set up water stations and hand out water. That's the difference. Like the fact that the president can get up there and everyone in the media can lie to you that you're not allowed to have water. Are you with me? All right, that's number one. Second lie, that this will result in longer lines. Voter suppression. No. The point of the law is shorter lines. You have all these headlines here about longer lines. Voter suppression. No. The law says that if in the previous election any line was longer than an hour, all right? So if in the last election there was a line that was longer than an hour, then the state takes over and does one of three things. They either increase the number of poll workers, increase the number of voting machines, or add different voting locations in that precinct. The point of this is to make lines shorter, and the media and the Democrats are calling this voter suppression. That's the second lie. Third lie, Biden says that the polls will close at 5 o'clock. Polls are closing at 5 o'clock, and the people are just getting off work. They won't be able to vote. Voter suppression. This is Biden saying the same at that same press conference.
Deciding in some states that you cannot bring water to people standing in line, waiting to vote. Deciding that you're going to end voting at 5 o'clock when working people are just getting off work.
He said in another statement, he said, among the outrageous parts of this new state law, it ends voting hours early, so working people can't cast their vote after the shift is over. That is wrong. The law says that early voting locations have to be open until at least 5 p.m. And it's up to each county if they want to stay open until 6 or 7. But this is early voting. Election day is still open until 7 p.m. statewide. Fourth lie, Sunday voting. There's something called souls to the polls. This is when, I guess, in the black church, although I don't know why this can be everyone who goes to church, but in the black church, they would go right from church to voting. And this bill ends Sunday voting, as you see right here. No more souls to the polls. No, it doesn't. Sunday is the least popular day of voting, right? Fewer people vote on Sundays than any other day. So this bill makes Sunday voting optional based on the county. You can still have it. If the county wants to have it, they can still have it. And in exchange, they added another Saturday of early voting. I've also heard people say that it decreases the number of days you can vote early. I love these two tweets here. So the first tweet here is from the governor of New Jersey, right? So the governor of New Jersey, Democrat, using all the same talking points about how I can't believe what they're doing. That may be hard to read there. Let me pull this up real quick. He's, of course, for whatever reason, he brought up Stacey Abrams, who Democrats still think should be the governor. Elizabeth Warren the other day said, the man who is sitting in Stacey Abrams' chair referring to the governor of Georgia. Anyway, so governor of New Jersey. Tomorrow, joined by Stacey Abrams, I will sign legislation establishing early voting in New Jersey, while states across our nation, Georgia, turn back the clock to Jim Crow era voter suppression laws. New Jersey will expand access to the ballot box. So New Jersey is now offering early voting. Aren't they wonderful? They're so noble and fantastic. They're offering early voting. They're offering 9 days of early voting. Wow, that is a really progressive state. The governor of Georgia wrote back, congratulations to the state of New Jersey on now having 9 days of early voting. Georgia has 17 mandatory days of early voting with 2 additional optional Sundays. So if you were to look at these 2 states and say, all right, which one of these is the Jim Crow state? The one that has 9 days of early voting or the one that has 19 days of early voting? You would say it's the one with 9, and that's New Jersey. Yet they're framing themselves as the progressive ones. Are you with me? Blatantly lying to your face. Why does this story matter? There's a couple political reasons, of course, right? Obviously, Georgia's a swing state. This is a message to every other red state that wants to do any voting reform. Like, even if you do genuinely good, decent, normal things, you're still going to get eviscerated and Jim Crowed and all this stuff, right? So all those things, yes. But there's a bigger thing here. When lies like this are exposed, it causes people to go to a really bad place. So imagine you're someone who watches CNN, who still thinks CNN is the news, right? And you're watching CNN and you read the New York Times and you get all worked up over SB 202 in Georgia and you're all like, oh, it's unbelievable. Like, I can't believe what they're doing in Georgia and they're suppressing the black vote and all this stuff. You get all worked up and you're all in a tizzy about it. And then you hear the segment we just did. You hear the last 5 minutes of the show. And you're like, well, wait a second. That will cause you to not know what to think, to not know who to believe. But that could be a real watershed moment. And it could lead to like a whole lot of things crumbling down in someone's life. And people react to that very differently. Sometimes people react to it in a very good way, right? And like the scales come off your eyes and you start to see the truth. Okay? Some people react to it in a not great way, right? Maybe you can become so cynical and disillusioned that you stop paying attention to politics entirely, but also just like everything, right? You're just like, you become like more of a nihilist. Like, everyone's lying to me all the time. What's going on? And then there's people who take it very, very poorly and very unhealthily. And they start going into conspiracy theory land about everything, because why not? I've been lied to about everything else in my life. Maybe there is an underage child sex trafficking ring at the local pizza place. I don't know, right? And that's a problem. I want to tell you the moment here that it came crashing down for me. You know, we see them all the time now, these fake hate crimes, nooses in trees that turn out to be exercise equipment, the Charlottesville hoax with President Trump. And almost every day we have one of these new things, right? But I want to share the story where I realized so much of the narrative that we're told is just fake. It's just totally made up. So here's my story. It was back in 2014. There was a terrorist hostage attack in Sydney. You may remember it. It was of course framed as a lone gunman. Took over a cafe, 16 hours, 18 hostages, 2 people died, and then the terrorist as well, and 4 people were injured. Right? So it's a noteworthy story. I remember when it happened, breaking news, the whole thing. But because the progressive worldview says that all criminals are the real victims, so terrorists are the victims, the media had to pivot to something else. Enter Rachel Jacobs. Rachel Jacobs started a hashtag called I'll Ride With You. You may remember it. It swept the country, swept the world. And this was a very noble movement where white people were telling Muslims, I'll ride with you. And the reason why is because every time there's a terrorist attack, the narrative turns to the rise of Islamophobia. Even though there's never a rise in Islamophobia, there's never a rise in anti-Muslim hate crimes, it never happens. Right? But immediately, whenever there's a terrorist attack, the media instantly turns to, a rise, there's gonna be a rise of Islamophobia, let's not do it. So this woman, she started this hashtag, and here's her story. She was on a train, and there was a Muslim woman sitting next to her. And they all started getting alerts to the terrorist attack going on. when they were on the train. Everyone on their phone was looking at it. And this woman, she was sitting next to this Muslim woman, and the Muslim woman looked at her phone and began to nervously remove her hijab. She was not so much ashamed of her faith. She was scared. Scared of what people would do to her. Scared of ignorant, bigoted, racist people, Islamophobic people who would attack her, take out their anger because of this terrorist attack on this Muslim woman with her hijab. So she writes of this. She says, I ran after her at the train station. I said, put it back on. I'll walk with you. She started to cry and hugged me for about a minute and then walked off alone. Heroic. Heroic. So people all across the world, inspired by this, and began to assert their own moral superiority by declaring that they too would risk death by riding alongside a Muslim. I mean, there's all these evil people, evil white people all over the place looking for Muslims to attack because of what happened. So Muslims need white people's support. And I think of stories like this, and I just think of this woman. So scared to walk around in her hijab. And I just think of what kind of people have we become? And I'm just grateful for people like Rachel Jacobs who just have the courage to do the right thing. Now the thing is, she made it all up. It never happened. Made it up. She wrote an article about what really happened. Never apologized for making it up. Just sort of explained it away. And I love this line. She says, at this point, I saw a woman on the train. This is the true story. Saw a woman on the train start to fiddle with her headscarf. Wait a second, I thought it was a job. Now it's a headscarf. Confession time. In my Facebook status, I editorialized. Oh, that's all. Not lied. She wasn't sitting next to me. She was a bit away towards the other end of the train. I spent the rest of the journey staring at the back of her uncovered head. I wanted to talk to her, but had no idea what to say. Anything that came to mind seemed tokenistic and patronizing. She might not even be a Muslim, or she could have just been warm. She could have just been warm. And the media took this story hook, line, and sinker and ran with it and turned it into this whole justice crusade. Meanwhile, was there ever any increase in anti-Muslim hate crime? No, there never is. I'll ride with you. Aren't I wonderful? I wonder how many of those people who wrote I'll ride with you ever actually did ride with a Muslim. Maybe they didn't have the courage. It was so dangerous. Now, maybe back then, in 2014, I'm talking about the media now, maybe they got hoodwinked too. I mean, they didn't come out and apologize for it, for getting hoodwinked. Maybe they just fell for it, right? Maybe back then in 2014, they were lazy. They didn't do their due diligence. They didn't do the work. The story was too good to check, right? And then they didn't care when it was found out to be a lie because whatever, they've moved on, okay? That was 2014. Today, with the media, they know they're lying. With George Floyd, with what they're doing with the Georgia voting law, you name it, every single day. They know they're lying to you. You know the truth because you're here. Where's everyone else supposed to get the true story? Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. Again, Henry David Thoreau, there's thousands hacking at the branches of evil for every one who strikes the root. We like to strike the root on this show. So when Joe Biden says that we're going to announce new plans and new proposals to address the increase in anti-Asian violence, you know they're going to be hacking at branches. We like to strike the root. Now, we also like to provide perspective. Last year, there were 122 anti-Asian hate crimes. 122 out of 330 million Americans and 19 million Asians. There were 122 people. Okay, that's the moral panic that we're talking about here. But I'll tell you how to stop them if you want to. Let's strike that root. How do you stop anti-Asian hate crimes? Well, you stop crimes. You stop criminals. You keep criminals in prison. Give you an example. Yesterday, on the show, yesterday, we played this video. New York City, 65-year-old Asian woman walking down the street, minding her own business. This guy comes out of nowhere, punches her in the chest, or kicks her in the chest, excuse me, then proceeds to stomp her head 3 times, then walks away. Now, there were other cameras around, and they got a clear picture of him just walking away like nothing happened. That guy is a psychopath. His name is Brandon Elliott. And they caught him. New York City caught him. New York City police caught him the next day. Turns out, shockingly, he's been arrested before. He was arrested in 2002 for stabbing to death his mother when he was 19. He served 17 years in state prison. 17 years for killing his mother. And now he's released on parole. So Biden says these rise in anti-Asian hate crimes must stop. But was that an anti-Asian hate crime? Or was that a murderer who only served 17 years for killing his mother? And in an effort to reform the inequitable justice system, was let back out in the streets far too early. We keep hearing from these progressives that there's too many people in jail. Are there? Maybe there's not enough. All the anti-Asian hate crimes that we talked about last week, and we went through a bunch of them, they're all in San Francisco, LA, and New York. And they're all from people who have been arrested many times before. Many times before. Yeah, I'm seeing more and more of Black Lives Matter and Stop Asian Hate. There's two slogans joining here. Black Lives Matter and Stop Asian Hate. 2 slogans united in one. Neither based on reality. Who's committing these crimes against Asians? Who are they? Are we just going to talk about it just generally? Are we going to just be vague and generalize, like, oh, stop Asian hate, stop crimes against Asians? Or are we going to be specific here? Again, are we hacking at branches, or do you want to strike the root? Who's actually committing these crimes? Well, it's usually homeless people, addicts, mentally ill, and people who've committed many crimes. That's who's doing it. So what's the root of that? Well, there's always there's the concentric circles that we talk about on the show all the time, the concentric circles. The middle concentric circle is personal responsibility. That's your conscience. So the reason why we have so much depravity in our country and our culture is because we've numbed our conscience so much that there's just no such thing as personal responsibility. The next concentric circle out is the family. So family breakdown. If someone's acting poorly, improperly, they don't have a conscience to stop them, and they don't have a family to rein them in. So the next concentric circle out is the criminal justice system, police. The people who are arguing the loudest for criminal justice reform, right? They're the ones who are calling to let people out of prison. They're calling for not tougher sentences, but lighter sentences, more chances. Let people who murder their mother out of prison. As the DA of Boston said, if you break into someone's house, it's okay as long as you afterwards say you were just looking for shelter. That's all. Why have there been 95 carjackings in Washington, D.C. so far this year? A carjacking. Again, carjacking is not stealing a car, right? A carjacking is someone's driving the car, you put a gun to their head and say, get out, and you steal it from, like, that's insane. If you ask me how many carjackings are there in the country every year, I'd be like, oh, that is like a brazen crime. Like, two carjackings? There's been 95 in 3 months? In one city? That's insane. 23 of them from juveniles. Why? Because they can. They get away with it. Because the DA and the criminals know that they're not going to get prosecuted, especially if you can just say the right thing. Criminals know what they can get away with. They're smart about that. And lawlessness begets more lawlessness. You know, we hear about justice all the time too, right? We need more justice, social justice, blah, blah. Okay, justice. What's justice? Well, justice is we need to let this man, Brandon Elliott, out of prison. Why? Well, he's black. He murdered his mom. Well, there's more black men in prison than, or a disproportionate amount of black men than white men. He murdered his mother. Well, we should let him go. Why? Justice. Okay. No one ever considers the justice of the 65-year-old innocent woman who was walking down the sidewalk minding her own business and got stomped in the head 3 times. Where's the justice there? Anyone care about that? No? No justice? Doesn't matter? Okay. Thomas Sowell, he said, for 200 years, the political left has been coming up with reasons why criminals should not be punished as much or at all. So it's not just a recent thing. It's been going on for a while. And one argument that these progressives come up with is they say, oh, it costs too much to incarcerate someone. It costs, whatever, $40,000 to incarcerate someone, and it's only $5,000 if we rehabilitate them with intensive probation. And I love that one's rich because all of a sudden the left cares about not wasting money. Give me a break. But Sowell says no one ever considers the cost of turning a criminal loose. What's the cost to that woman, her family, and all of society with more people like that guy walking around? Not allowed to think about that. Don't factor in that cost. One of the mottos on this show is perhaps the opposite is true. So when you hear a claim, just think for a moment. Perhaps the opposite is true. The opposite's not always true, but oftentimes it is. So we're told we need fewer prisons, okay? So we've got to shut down our prisons, we need fewer prisons. Okay, that's the claim, fewer prisons. Okay, what's the opposite? Okay, maybe, what if we need more prisons? Think about it, we're told we need fewer. Okay, I will consider that. But first, maybe we need more. Could that be true? One of the more famous New York Times headlines is from 1997. Take this headline in. The headline is, crime keeps on falling, but prisons keep on filling. Yeah. I know. Throw it back up here. It was written by this guy, I think his name is like Fox Butterfield or something was the guy's name. It's called the Butterfield effect. It's when they get things backwards. This guy says, crime keeps on falling, but prisons keep on filling up. He doesn't see that the prisons filling up is what's making the crime fall. See? We should be building more prisons. Oh, Slater, that's outrageous. That's unjust. Whoa. Why are you more concerned with the rapist than the rape victim? Why are you more concerned about Brandon Elliott than his mom? Or the 65-year-old lady he kicked in the head? I just ask that maybe we recalibrate our compassion a bit. Thomas Sowell said, one of the mysteries of the ages is why the political left has for centuries lavished so much attention on the well-being of criminals and paid so little attention to their victims. Final point here from Theodore Dalrymple, one of my favorite writers. He said, criminals hate police. They've always hated police, obviously. But more and more of the intellectual class are proudly and actively hating the police. Why? The intellectuals, they hate the police as a type of virtue signaling of solidarity with the poor, right? Oh, poor people hate the police. I hate the police too. We hate the police too, right? So it's like solidarity. I'm with you. I'm just like you. Also, rich people, intellectuals, they're not calling for no police in their neighborhoods. They're not calling for people to be released from prison to walk their streets. They don't feel the consequences of their activism. Maybe the only thing that could change that are 3 swift kicks to the head. And for any intellectual who wants that, I know just the person for the job. This guy. Don't worry, he'll probably be back on the streets later this afternoon. Coming up next, we'll talk about the so-called infrastructure bill. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. Tomorrow's special is about restoring faith, our faith in this country. Obviously, Easter weekend coming up here. The latest poll was just released that in 1999, 70% of people claimed membership of a church. In 2018, it was 50%, and right now it's 47% at an all-time low. And of course, on this show, we talk all the time about how we've removed God from the center of our lives and also from the center of our culture and our country. And when you do that, well, we try to replace it with other things, mostly ourselves, but plenty of other things, and it never does the trick. Dave Engelhardt is here. He's a pastor at King's Church in New York City. Mr. Engelhardt, how are you, sir?
Mike, doing well. Good to be on. Thanks for having me.
Good to talk to you, man.
This
yeah, brother.
Easter.
Yeah, especially. Where to start here? Maybe just get your assessment on where we are when it comes to the Christian faith in this country. I mean, everyone's got a different perspective, and I'm pretty cynical right now, and I'm not in a great place with it, at least nationwide, but how do you see it?
Yeah, I mean, I see really pragmatically an ejection from Christian faith. And I don't mean that from a theological context. I mean that from a pragmatic context. When we have the churches across the nation, I think the stat today is that 60% of the churches are still shut down. Of the 40% that are shut down or that are not shut down, 75% of those churches are at 25% capacity. And so I see literally an ejection of Christianity practically from the everyday culture. You were just repeating those stats. I mean, and how horrific are those stats now today? I think the stats were also 30% of the churches through the pandemic would never come back. They wouldn't exist. And sadly and tragically, the churches that are holding on are a lot of these attractional churches that are morally, just kind of hanging out with culture and just going down the river. And like, what are we talking about? Culture? Like, we're talking about Black Lives Matter. Oh, great. I'm going to preach about that for 9 weeks. Oh, now we're talking about Me Too. Oh, great. That's my next sermon series. So rather than being a moral rudder, right? Rather than being the moral arbiters, it's like we're taking our cues from the secular world. So the church, because it's been doing that, Mike, because we see this ejection from of the church and culture, nobody really cares. And I wouldn't say I'm cynical. I would say I'm happy for a shaking of the tree so that what remains can be strengthened.
Yes. Yep. Amen to that. So I look at your website, obviously, King's Church, New York City, and you got your statement of faith, you have your Apostles' Creed, you have an Nicene Creed. I mean, these things are thousands of years old, and I agree with every word of it. And even I look at it and I'm like, ooh, that's gonna get you in trouble, Pastor. You know what I mean? Like, what's up with that? Like, how far have we fallen?
On my statement of faith, and then we get into marriage. We get into classical marriage, right? We get into all of the hot button issues that I expected the church to get burnt down when I first posted all of that kind of stuff. But really, I mean, how are we not just a self-help group that says in Jesus' name at the end? Like, how are we supposed to be distinctly different, a different people group? Like, God's intention was always to be God of a people, not just a person. But because we have narcissism and we're so self-focused, we're interested in ourselves, and we forget that God always wanted to be God of a nation, of a people group.
Okay, let's get into some woke stuff here, because as you mentioned, churches are embracing this critical race theory philosophy and worldview and bringing it into the church and not holding up the gospel first. So first, how do you define critical race theory? That's important so people know what to look for even.
I define critical race theory as axiomatically wearing a lens that views the world at all times through a very distilled perspective, which is races in opposition to each other, statistically unfounded, but based upon this Marxian kind of dialectic that there's an oppressive class and a non-oppressive class. And critical race theory asks us to look at all institutions through a lens and assume that inside those institutions there is inherently oppression based upon skin color, based upon your race. And so that's why it's critical race theory. Critical race theory has a long process, but it came through critical legal theory. I'm an attorney as well as a pastor, so I have some of that knowledge base. But the fundamental thing as a Christian is it is axiomatically opposed to our faith. Our faith does two things. Salvation does two things, Mike. It reconciles us to God and reconciles us one to another. So when you bring in critical race theory, and the mission of that ideology is to separate and based upon assumed sins and assumed wrongs and assumed oppressors and assumed victims, you destroy what the gospel fundamentally with God and unify one to another, not based upon what we can do, but based upon faith through Christ Jesus and his sacrifice. It wipes away sin and it brings us together as a people. That's what Paul says in the book of Galatians. That's why he says we're now neither Jew, Gentile, male, female. He's not talking about us not having different roles. He's saying nationally, we're now one people. We're not separate races anymore. Ultimately, we're a part of this new kingdom. And so critical race theory literally does the opposite of that, which is why I've been incredibly opposed to it for the last, really since it's hit the church platform in the last 9 months.
Yeah.
And what's that, Mike?
No, sorry, I was just going to jump in. Let me play devil's advocate. Obviously, I agree with you. So let me come back and see what you would say to these. So you, Dave, are... you're not acknowledging the traumas of not only the past, but of the racism that exists in America today by denying us the ability to talk about race through this lens. What do you say?
Well, when you say through the lens, I think that changes the conversation, right? Because we're allowed to talk. We're not only allowed to talk about sin and culture, whether it's racism, sexual confusion, theft, right, coercion, slavery. We're allowed to talk about every wrong, and then we're not only allowed to talk about it, but as believers, we're compelled to force people to repent of things like racism, coercion, theft, all of those things. We're saying you're not allowed to walk in and assume, because when you assume someone from their heart has a certain set of beliefs, you do something which this guy, Vodi Bakum, this incredible Bible teacher, he calls it ethnic Gnosticism. And ethnic Gnosticism is this idea that based upon my ethnicity, I have this divine knowing that you are racist. Mike, I can tell you're racist by that haircut. That's definitely not a haircut of a guy that likes people of my skin color. And I divinely know that Gnostically about your ethnicity and all of the people about your ethnicity. So I would I would bifurcate your statement. I would say we are allowed to talk about all kinds of sins, every kind of sin, and we call people to repent for every kind of sin. But we do not view sin in a way where we say all of these things, I know them automatically, I assume them, and I use this Marxist tool as a tool inside of the church.
So inside of the church is key. So again, devil's advocate. Someone's going to come and say, so let's say I'm black. We live in a systemically oppressive country. And then I come up with this example where I'm not making as much money as someone else or whatever. So then I come into the church to you and I say, my voice isn't being heard. Our voice, the black voice, isn't being heard in the church. And I'm feeling oppressed here, Pastor, as well, which is why we need this framework in the church so that minority voices can truly be heard. What do you say?
Yeah. So let me say something philosophical. All moral statements are based upon facts, right? Like let me say it this way. All moral equations are based upon facts. Morality is a moral mathematical calculation, if you will. If you steal from another person, then you get that thing taken from you. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, Hammurabi's code, Bible, blah, 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 blah. So when you say to me, I don't feel my voice is heard in this church, I would say, well, that's not true. You believe something that's not true. I refuse to apply biblical morality to untrue statements. So any untrue statement in the world, because you feel a certain way, that doesn't mean that morality applies or biblical morality applies. We certainly, and this is something we've been consistent about, call out sin and point to actual alleged wrongs, but we're also slow to judgment because that's where wisdom exists. So if you just came and said, I feel this way in culture, I would say to you, and I've said to people of color in my church, you have to point to me specifics where you've had that experience. And if you're a believer, you have to forgive those people that have acted that way against you. That's your obligation as a Christian. You could be in the secular world and say, I don't need to forgive. I'm just going to live my life in anger. Fine. Do rock and roll, man. But if you are a Christian and you believe in historical Orthodox Christianity, it is your obligation to forgive people that have wronged you. So you now get to walk in growing in forgiveness. And this is a Catholic concept, more than the Protestants really hold on to it, is that every wrong in our life is an opportunity from, or let's say, by God in the cosmic sense, to make us more like the person of Christ. And we don't live that way. We live in a narcissist society where if I'm not perfect and the temperature's not perfect and all my ways aren't perfect, then something else is wrong and it's someone else's fault. And I don't believe I can apply the moral standard that I've been given to and be entrusted with to false ideas. And actually, that's some of the issues that we've had in our culture. For instance, we had people saying to me, we have serious issues with black people being murdered in New York City, and it's systemically oppressive. And I said, no, that's not true. If you look at the statistics, unarmed black people do not get killed more than unarmed white person. It's untrue. So when you're asking me to apply some kind of fire and brimstone morality to an untrue statement, you're doing something evil. And I think that's actually what's happening in many of our world churches right now, Mike.
Yeah, it's so tricky, Pastor. This is our last question. I got to run here, but it's so tricky because it almost feels like if you're in the church, we're supposed to put extra emphasis on the I feel statements, just in the name of tolerance and love and compassion, right? It's supposed like, well, I feel like I'm this, or I feel like more black people, unarmed black men are killed by whatever. And it's like, oh, if a Christian has come to you and says that's not true, that feels like so like rude or unloving or whatever. How do you square that?
Yeah, I square that by saying you can't have mercy without justice. Mercy does not exist without a fundamental state or nature of justice. And so the scripture says it. It says God's throne is seated upon justice and mercy flows forth from him. And the concept is, I can't be nice to you in the concentration camp. I can't be a nice prison guard that's guarding the Nazis. It's incredibly evil. My niceness is more evil. And because we have a society that's ejected itself from basic truth, facts, and justice, we believe that being nice is more important than being just. But actually, if we're not first just, we cannot be merciful as a society. So yes, people's feelings are great and important, but it's more important that we don't kill babies. It's more important that justice is executed, whether or not people feel okay about the justice. They can deal with their feelings if they exist. If they don't exist, they don't have feelings that they can deal with or move through. So I think we have a society that's separated itself from justice and therefore doesn't understand that that's fundamental to all of those other kind of, they're called the soft virtues.
Pastor, we got to run. Can we talk frequently?
Absolutely, Mike. Happy to.
I would be grateful, man. So grateful. Dave Engelhardt from King's Church, New York City, kcnyc.org to learn more and send it off to your church pastors. Make sure we're following in good leadership. Dave, appreciate you, brother.
Thanks, Mike.
Do it again. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word.
We're talking about realistically $10 trillion over 10 years. And I know that may be an eye-popping figure for some people, but we need to understand that we are in a devastating economic moment. Millions of people in the United States are unemployed. We have a truly crippled healthcare system and a planetary crisis on our hands, and we're the wealthiest nation in the history of the world. So we can do 10 trillion.
That's great. Yeah, that's a bit of an eye popper, AOC. Dan Eberhardt's here, CEO of the oil company Canary. What's going on, Dan?
Hi, thanks for having me back.
Yeah, brother. So we only got a few minutes, but give us the worst things that are in this infrastructure bill, because it's not about bridges and roads, and I hope people are wise up to that fact by now.
Well, I just would say, wow, look, first of all, I think the bad news here for everybody is this is going to lead to higher taxes for the rest of our generation and for our kids' generation. We need to focus on something that's, commensurate with the size of the economy and what we're trying to do. Look, the output gap for the difference between the size of the economy now and before the pandemic is about $400 billion. We already shot a 1.9 trillion stimulus plan out into the open here. Now Biden's looking at a 2.25 trillion infrastructure plan. It's way too much. It's way overshooting the mark. This is going to be inflationary, and it's going to cause us higher taxes on the middle class and the upper class that create jobs. And this is just really inflationary for the consumer in the middle. I also think that a lot of this stuff is aspirational green energy, clean energy jobs that, with the return profile isn't necessarily there. And he's going after this at a scale that's just simply too large and unproven. And it's going to come back to bite us in the form of higher inflation and more debt.
On your point about taxes, remember Joe Biden said, I assure you, I promise you, no taxes over anyone who makes $400,000. And then last week, Pete Buttigieg, who for whatever reasons the head of the Department of Transportation, said they're thinking about a per mile tax. Well, who's going to pay that, and who's that going to hurt the most? So how else are they going to pay for this thing?
Well, this is the creeping regulatory and tax increases that we saw in the Obama-Biden administration just, percolating itself with a much bigger bazooka here. Look, this is going to lead to increased taxes. They're already saying increased capital gain taxes, increased income taxes, and other, taxes and fees are going to go up to pay for all of this, and that is going to slow economic growth. Look, capital gains taxes affect everyone's retirement plan and affect people when they sell a house, sell a small business. Those taxes going up is an absolute negative. And raising the corporate tax rate hurts, people's retirement plans, hurts the stock market, and trickles down to hurting Main Street too. I think that this plan is a good idea, but we're going to be bad for the future of the middle class.
If this bill was, let's build some bridges that we really need, then we could have a conversation. But I hear more and more about how this is like fundamentally changing structures and who's in charge of what. And there's much more than building things. So do you know much about that?
Yeah, this is absolutely not a traditional vanilla infrastructure bill that's focused on roads, bridges, airports, and schools. This is a much more of a progressive wish list that's focused on clean energy, environmental tech, and other things. So this is going to cause a really big problem for the middle class in this country. And I think everybody needs to think twice and contact their representatives about this. This is way too much, and we need to dial it back.
Dan Eberhardt, Canary CEO, Dan K. Eberhardt on Twitter. Thanks, Dan. Appreciate you.
Thank you for having me back.
Yeah, man. This is what we get. That's why the Senate's 50-50, right? And stuff like this is going to pass. And Joe Biden ain't running the show there. And there's going to be things stuck in this bill that are way, way beyond even just pork. Like, remember back in the day we used to complain about wasteful spending? This is a structural change to America and who's in charge of what, and a federalization of things that used to be in charge of state and local control. That's the real problem with it. Tomorrow is our special. In God We Trust, Restoring Faith in America on this Easter weekend. And we're talking about how we get God back in the center of our lives individually and in our culture and in our country. That's tomorrow's special. Have a great rest of your day. We'll see you tomorrow. Spread the word.